Mark, you've now spoken to the President of the United States more times in the past 7 days than I've spoken to my own parents, which is not going to go down particularly well.
Yeah, sorry about that, Martha. No, you give your parents a ring. Come on. It's probably as easy to call up the Kellners as it is to call up the president, as I'm finding out. Absolutely extraordinary. Another conversation with President Trump. I'm Mark Stone in Washington, D.C.
And I'm Martha Kellner in Los Angeles.
And we were going to talk about Israel, Lebanon, Iran, and so much more. But then the president picked up my call once again. A longer conversation this time, a 5-minute interview at around 6:30 last night.
Yeah, we're going to go through clearly what he said, his thoughts on the royal visit. More details have been announced about the choreography of that visit. But much more than that, he was scathing about the UK, about the special relationship and Sir Keir Starmer.
Yeah, he really was. Language that I think was stronger than I have heard before, and a bit of a threat too about that trade deal. We will tell you all.
So, Mark, another Tuesday evening and another call with the leader of the free world. This is becoming a bit of a habit for you. I think people are fascinated, though, by the fact that you are quite literally picking up your mobile phone and calling Donald Trump on his mobile phone. Like, how does this work?
Yeah, well, great question. And I don't think we quite explained it well enough in last week's episode when I first called him. Yeah, it is literally his cell phone. As we understand it, he has 3 cell phones. And one of them, we have the number. And when you call, he does either picks up or he doesn't. And this evening, as he did last Tuesday evening, he picked up. And it's not as if, a colleague of mine said to me, so what happens at the end of the call? Do you get transferred back through to the White House switchboard or to, Caroline Levitt for sort of a debrief? I said, no, it's his cell phone. And I mean, it's extraordinary. And I can't recall, I don't think there's any other world leader where this happens. It's a very strange, it's just very strange.
Do we think he has 3 phone numbers, one for sort of close family and friends, one for the vice president, and then one for other people who he meets out and about and journalists?
What I do know is that he does pick up, and it is kind of like calling, well, it's not like calling the president, put it that way. I was in here. I had my phone here, put it on speakerphone so that the production team, my colleagues and friends around me could scribble down what he was saying, because the other thing is you can't record it until you've got permission to record it. I'll come on to that. So I put the phone on here, press call, and in 3 rings, hello. And I said something like, Mr. President, it's Mark Stone from Sky News. We spoke last week. And I said, how are you? And I remember what he said then. He said, good, what's up?
I'm fine, thanks.
Yeah, all good. I'm all good. How are you? A busy week? It was extraordinary. And also, as I said last week, you don't then want to go in hard with what the heck were you thinking when you were insulting the Pope, or why do you think you're Jesus, or anything like that? Because he could just hang up. And the other really important thing, as I said, is that you can't record these calls until you've got permission to. So I then had to very quickly get in there and say, I'm recording this call just for my own purposes, and hope that doesn't ruin the thread or ruin the sort of flow of the call.
It didn't, though, clearly, did it? Because he gave you more time on this occasion than he did last week, right?
It didn't at all. And he said, yeah, you can. But then he said, but you're not releasing it. And I said, no, just for my own purposes. And he said, and I have your word on that. So it was quite interesting. Right at the beginning of this call, up front, I have your word on that. And I said, yeah, we won't release it. It's just for, so we don't create another sort of fake news incident where I misquote you.
Is that in case he says something totally outrageous and then he can just say, oh, I didn't say that. They must have misquoted me. It's the fake news media. Is that why he doesn't want it?
Maybe. I don't know. It's a good question. But what it certainly means is that you do get a slightly different, we discussed this, where you get a slightly different President Trump. He was calmer. He wasn't shouty like he often is. Maybe it was because it was the evening. He'd had a long day, but he was definitely calmer. And also, when I did, and we'll get into this, I pushed him on a few things that he said that I thought were kind of out there. And I think if the cameras had been rolling, he'd have been like, but who are you? Fake news and all this. But he didn't. He just kind of took it. He was like, if you want to criticize me, fine, whatever.
And a lot of the conversation was about the UK, because an hour before you picked up the phone to President Trump, we had more news about the upcoming royal visit, King Charles and Queen Camilla going over to the US as monarchs, which is the first time since Queen Elizabeth II visited the United States in 2007. We now know that this will be a 4-day trip. And you asked him about how he's feeling about that moment. And he's obviously, quite fond of the monarchy and the king and queen.
Very fond, and you could kind of almost feel his excitement. I asked how he was feeling about the trip, the visit, and he said that he was very excited. Great, he said. He's a great gentleman, a friend of mine, a fantastic person. Talking, of course, about King Charles. I asked him which part of the royal visit he was looking forward to the most, and guess what he said? All of it. I'm looking forward to all of it.
No
Incidentally,
specifics.
No, yeah, exactly. It's a 4-day trip. I mean, they're here for basically the whole week, the week after next. So they've got a day in. They arrive on the Monday. They've got a big garden party at the Lutyens mansion that is the British Embassy here in Washington. Then on the Tuesday, it's the Washington Day, the White House, Capitol Hill, state banquet, all of that. Then they go to New York, the 9/11 memorial, all that sort of thing. And then on the Thursday, they go to the countryside to Virginia, Shenandoah. So it's a 4-day visit. And the president told me he is looking forward to all of it, just being with him. The president said, I've known him for a long time. And then he said it again. He's a wonderful, wonderful person, which kind of felt like a stark contrast to the way he then went on to talk about poor old Sir Keir Starmer.
Yeah, I've read the transcript, and it is quite the contrast. It's clear that he has so much love. He's enamoured by the British royal family. Although it didn't seem like Donald Trump knows that it's Downing Street that greenlights these royal visits, not the king, because Sir Keir Starmer has to sign on the dotted line, in effect.
Yeah, exactly. The king is only coming because Downing Street asked him to. And let's be honest, the reason that the king is coming is because he's seen as pretty effective soft power. And Downing Street knows that the president likes the king, likes the royal family. So he's come here to do a bit of work for the government. But the president doesn't seem to know that. I asked him about it. I sort of asked him whether he thought the strained relationship with Keir Starmer was going to have an impact on the visit. And he said not at all. I've known the king a long time. He's not involved in that process, the politics. But then I said, but he's been asked to come here to America by Downing Street, by the Prime Minister. And the president said, I don't know who asked. I mean, I didn't realize that. But if he is, that's my honor. It's my honor to have him at the White House. So it appeared to me he wasn't entirely clear of the process, that the king hasn't just come here for a jolly. The king has come here on government business, effectively.
Yeah, he's trying to get something out of it himself. And, there's been no let-up, has there, of these attacks on Keir Starmer. A few hours before you spoke to him, Mark, he was back on Truth Social saying Europe is desperate for energy, yet the United Kingdom refuses to open North Sea oil, one of the greatest fields in the world. He wrote that on Truth Social. I think he signed off by saying, this is tragic.
Yeah, and tragic is a word he used twice with me on the phone. There's barely a day when he doesn't criticise the Prime Minister. And when I mentioned the special relationship to him, the President first replied, rather intriguingly, with who? It was almost as if he hadn't actually heard of the phrase special relationship, which I don't think is quite fair. I think he's used that before. He clearly knows about it, but in the moment he seemed slightly sort of confused. So I sort of pointed out, well, with the special relationship with the British government, with Britain, and then he kind of posed the question again: how is the relationship? He said the relationship is where when I asked them for help, they were not there. When we needed them, they were not there. When we didn't need them, they were not there, and they still aren't there. And so I said to him, it sounds like it's very bad in that case. And he said, well, it's been better but it's sad. So, I mean, devastating, I thought.
Yeah, and also untrue. If you look back at the history of the UK supporting the United States.
Yeah. I mean, I guess he's talking about recent history. He's talking about, the last few weeks where Britain was, Keir Starmer took a stand and decided it wasn't the right thing to do. Indeed, it wasn't the legal thing to do, to follow America into this Iranian adventure. And so, he may have split opinion a bit, but Keir Starmer decided to be principled on this, and it's cost him. It's cost him his relationship, or certainly the close relationship that he once had with Donald Trump.
And you rightly asked him about whether this is going to be awkward for the British government, that he's clearly frustrated with the Prime Minister right at the point that the King is set to arrive on US soil for this historic visit. And obviously, we can't use the recording, but Donald Trump replied to you. He said, well, no, I don't, presumably meaning he doesn't think it's awkward. He said, I think that I like Starmer, but I think he's made a tragic mistake in closing the North Sea oil. You see, your energy prices are the highest in the world.
Not true, by the way. We should call him out on that. I didn't in the interview, but I'm pretty sure that the UK energy prices are not the highest in the world. But there we go.
Yeah. And I think he's made a tragic mistake on immigration, he went on to say, which obviously is a big talking point for Donald Trump and for large swathes of the country. So when he said tragic, he also went on to say, I love your country and I would love to see it succeed. But if you have bad immigration policies and bad energy policies, you have the worst of both. You can't succeed. It's not possible.
Yeah, so this was the point in the interview, maybe 2 minutes in, where I was feeling a bit more confident in the sense that, we had a rapport going. We were having a conversation. I felt he was less likely just to hang up. So it was time to sort of ratchet it up a bit. And so I pushed back and I said, look, isn't it up to Keir Starmer as UK Prime Minister to make his own judgments about his own country, to run his own country, and not the American president's job to do that? And I sort of thought, is it going to be ding, call over? Yeah. Not at all. As I said, this was a kind of, a calmer President Trump. And his response was, well, it is. In other words, it is his job, not my job, to run Britain. Then he said, but a lot of people ask me what I think about them being British policies. And I think they're insane. They're destroying. Your country is being invaded, he said.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I know that is a big talking point among the MAGA right. I was at a church a few weeks ago in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And, one of the congregation came up to me and he was, oh, where are you from? Very friendly, nice man. And I said, oh, I'm from the United Kingdom. And he looked at me knowingly and said, oh, you've got your own problems over there, haven't you? Being invaded. And the amount of times that people, and it's not just in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I've had it down the road in one of the fanciest parts of LA. That really has gathered steam, hasn't it? This idea, which is ludicrous, that, London is being overtaken by Muslims.
So I thought it might be probably the moment with the president to wonder whether he was spouting a bit of fake news. So I held on to the table, pretty sure he was going to hang up at this point. And I said, Mr. President, isn't it maybe fake news, your fake news, to suggest that our country is being invaded and that maybe the information you're getting about our own immigration challenges, which are certainly there, but not quite as exaggerated as you claim. Maybe you've been given the wrong information. And his answer was intriguing. He said, I've been very accurate here. So in other words, I got it right here in America, where we are being invaded by immigrants, so he says. And so it must be the case that it is the same there. So I thought that was very interesting. But he also, Martha, he echoed, he applied precisely the same sound bites to our immigration challenges as he has done in America. I said, who are we being invaded by? He said, by illegal immigrants from all over the world, including those from prisons, drug dealers, people from mental institutions. Your country is being invaded. Does that sound familiar?
Same. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically almost word for word what he says about America at every rally and every Oval Office moment. People from prisons, drug dealers, people from mental institutions.
The White House always say this is the most approachable president in history. And it is very difficult to argue with that when you are quite literally picking up the phone and giving him a call.
Yeah.
He's clearly very amiable with you on the phone, gives up his time. But this is a week, isn't it, where more than ever, there have been calls for the 25th Amendment to be invoked. There are people who have worked with him previously who are saying he is going insane, that this is a madman in charge. And, it's quite difficult to square off this, approachable man that you're talking to with a guy who's posting pictures of himself as Jesus, who's going on rants about Sharpie pens for 4 minutes in the middle of a conflict which he started, a major war which he started, and, coming on to presenters live on Fox News. These things that all make him seem quite mad. I wonder, which do you think is the real Donald Trump?
Yeah, look, great question. I think I wish I knew the answer to that. What I would say is, look, first of all, why does he pick up the phone to a random journalist? And I'm not the only one he's talking to. Of course not. There are an increasing number of us who have access to his number. Why does he pick up the phone? Well, I think because he loves the attention. Yes, he enjoys being accessible, but he also loves the attention. I think that's absolutely the case. Why is he different? And he is different. We've discussed it. He's different on the phone. He's not shouty. He's not, performative. And well, why is that? Well, because he knows the cameras aren't rolling, and he therefore doesn't need to be performative. And it's striking that he wanted to know and wanted my word that I wasn't going to publish the call. And he was definitely different. But he was coherent. And there's no doubt about that. In fact, more coherent, I thought, than he often is in these weaving speeches that he does, where you're like, what on earth is he talking about? He's gone off on a tangent. He wasn't in this call. Okay, it was only 5 minutes, but he was coherent. I didn't agree with some of what he said. I felt like his facts were wrong, as we've discussed. But there was a coherence to the conversation without question. He did sound low energy. I have to say, lower energy in this call than he did last week. Which is interesting because last week the call was at 11:15 at night. This evening, this time it was 6:30 or so much earlier in the evening. But he did sound low energy.
And I guess if we're looking for real hard news from your conversation, one of the most interesting things was a comment that the president slipped in halfway through your call. He said that he had given the UK a good trade deal, better than he had to. And this is the crucial bit, he said, but that could change. And the UK, as he said, did agree a relatively favourable trade agreement last year. That was in the wake of Liberation Day and all the tariffs.
God, remember that.
But the idea that could be backtracked, that he could change his mind on that, is huge news if he goes through on it.
A really big deal. So let me read you the precise quote. He's talking about the fact that Britain wasn't there when he needed them, or even when he didn't need them, as he said. Then he went on to say, we gave them a good trade deal, better than I had to, which can always be changed. That is a threat, no question about that. We can always change that trade deal should we want to. And then I thought this was interesting. He went on to say, in an almost pitying way, he said, we gave them a trade deal that was very good because they're having a lot of problems. In other words, poor old Britain. They need a break. Bless them. They need a break. We'll give them a good trade deal. I mean, I think the diplomats behind the scenes would say that's simply not true. What actually happened is that both sides hammered it out for a long time. British diplomats would say they had a slightly better job. They had an easier job because they weren't negotiating as part of a trading bloc like the EU. And so they managed to carve out a good deal. And don't forget, it was at a time when Keir Starmer and Donald Trump were getting on swimmingly. So again, maybe a bit of exaggeration there, but nevertheless, a threat from the president that will alarm Downing Street, I think.
Yeah, it certainly will. And I guess you get the impression when you're on these calls, Mark, when is the right time to start wrapping up?
Well, no, you don't. You want to keep going as long as you can, but it becomes quite clear that he is ready.
Yeah.
To wrap it up, yeah.
And you managed to squeeze in right before the end a question on Iran.
He said, listen, I have to go. And I was like, I want one more in, because we hadn't talked about, this huge issue that is Iran. We hadn't talked about Lebanon. We hadn't talked about the Pope. We hadn't talked about Jesus either. So I obviously wanted to get onto all of that. So I said, can I ask you just one thing about Iran? Do you think that you'll have a deal by the time the king comes? And he said, it's possible, very possible. They're beaten up pretty bad. It's very possible. And that was it. Then he said, I have to go. And that was the end of the call. So no chance to ask him if he really does think he's Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Speak to you next week, Mr. President.
Speak to you next week, Mr. President. Yeah, absolutely extraordinary. Some smart aleck listener, Martha, said that I say extraordinary too much, and she was going to have a drinking game with her buddies. Every time I say extraordinary, someone has to drink. So there you go.
That's quite flattering. Someone centering a drinking game around you, Mark.
Around my inability to find other words other than extraordinary.
This is extraordinary, though. I'll defend you here.
Thank you, Martha. It is genuinely extraordinary that this extraordinary president picks up the phone.
Hey, someone's going to be getting really pissed wherever she is.
Yeah, that's true. Extraordinary. That is it for today. We'll be back on Friday with a lot more. But thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you for listening as ever. Trump100@sky.uk is the email if you have a question or a comment, or if there's a word that we're saying too much, or if you want new drinking game ideas. And exactly. And don't forget all our other wonderful podcasts, The World with Yalda and Richard. This is Why with Neil Patterson and all the rest of them as well. Bye-bye. See you soon.